Today, we're jumping into a topic that, frankly, affects everyone as global populations get older: neoplasms.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a broad term covering everything from benign tumors right through to the malignant growths we usually call cancer.
Exactly.
We're going to unpack the global stats, the risk factors, and really crucially, how aging just dramatically shapes these trends.
And this isn't just scratching the surface.
No, not at all. This deep dive is built on a really profound review of data spanning, 1990 right up to 2021.
That's correct. Over 3 decades of data.
And that's work done by Dr. Reza Lankarani, a distinguished general surgeon, founder of the Surgical Pioneering newsletter and podcast series, and also an editorial board member of the Genesis Journal of Surgery and Medicine.
A very comprehensive piece of work.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to distill the most vital insights from this huge data set. We want to give you a clear, concise understanding of what's a really critical global health challenge.
And neoplasms, as you said, are a major and actually growing public health issue worldwide. And they do disproportionately hit the elderly population.
Right.
This study we're looking at is incredibly robust. It covers neoplasms overall, but also dives into 34 specific types.
Wow, 34.
Yeah, across global, regional, national levels. And it uses key measures like incidence, so the rate of new cases, mortality, and maybe most revealingly, DALYS, or disability-adjusted life years.
Ah, yes, DALYS. They give you that measure of healthy life lost, right, due to illness or dying too young.
Precisely. It gives a fuller picture of the burden than just mortality alone. It's a very solid look at the data.
Okay, let's unpack this then. What are the big trends we're seeing? What's the scale of this?
Well, the overall burden is quite stark, especially if you focus on the older demographic. So in 2021, just for individuals aged 55 and older, there were nearly 34 million new neoplasm cases globally.
34 million?
Yeah. That translates to an incidence rate of around 2,281 new cases per 100,000 people in that age group.
That's a huge number.
It is. And the number of deaths was just over 8 million. That's a mortality rate of about 551 per 100,000.
Okay.
And the DALYs, well, they totaled over 170 million, a rate of nearly 11,500 per 100,000. These are genuinely staggering figures.
They really are. But here's the thing that honestly stopped me in my tracks when I looked at this data. There's a surprising trend, isn't there? While the raw number of new cases went up, the rates of mortality in dailies actually decreased between 1990 and 2021.
That's right. A slight increase in the incidence rate, about 0.16, but decreases in mortality and daily rates.
It almost feels contradictory, doesn't it? More cases, but lower death rates. How does that work?
Well, it's actually one of the most encouraging findings in the whole review, I think. It really speaks to progress. The study points to several key reasons for this drop in deaths and lost healthy years, even with more diagnoses. First, significant improvements in just managing neoplasms.
Like treatments.
Exactly. Updated treatment guidelines, major advances in therapeutic tech, think better surgeries, targeted therapies, immunotherapies.
Right.
Plus, there's been a big increase globally in public health awareness. More focus on early diagnosis, more screening programs.
Catching things earlier.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So all these factors together mean that while, yes, more people are being diagnosed, partly because we're better at finding it and people are living longer, they're also surviving longer. And, crucially, living with a better quality of life. We're simply getting better at fighting these diseases once they appear.
That is genuinely positive news. It's good to hear amidst such a challenging picture.
Yeah.
But it does underline that the battle is increasingly focused on our aging populations, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The data is unequivocal. In 2020, for instance, a huge 64% of the 19.3 million new cancer cases worldwide were in people aged 65 and older.
64%.
Wow. And even more starkly, that same group accounted for 71.3% of all cancer-related deaths.
Over 70%. So what does this massive, disproportionate impact really mean for how we, as a global society, think about and plan for an aging world?
It means this burden is only going to grow as the population ages. But what's really fascinating, and maybe unexpected, is how socioeconomic development plays into this.
Okay, tell me about that. The study uses this SDI thing, right? Sociodemographic index.
That's right. And it found that as the SDI level rises, meaning more socioeconomic development, the impact of aging on neoplasms actually increases. Higher SDI countries generally have higher incidence rates.
Higher incidence in more developed countries. Why would that be?
Well, it's not necessarily a bad sign. It often reflects things like longer life expectancies, simply more time for cancers to develop, but also critically more sophisticated diagnostic tools and more widespread health screening.
So they're just finding more cases.
Exactly. They catch cases earlier and maybe find cases that might have gone undetected in less developed settings. The key insight is that development changes the nature of the cancer burden a country faces, not just the size.
That's a really critical distinction. And when you look geographically, those regional differences really jump out.
They certainly do.
High-income regions, especially North America and the USA specifically, seem to be dealing with the highest rates of new diagnoses in the elderly.
Yes. High-income North America had the highest rate in 2021, over 10,000 per 100,000. And the USA had the highest absolute number of cases, over 11 million, and the highest incidence rate globally. Plus, the fastest increase in that rate since 1990.
It sounds like prosperity brings longer lives, more screening, and therefore higher recorded incidence.
Generally, yes. But the story flips a bit when you look at mortality and dailies.
How so?
While the absolute highest number of deaths is in large population countries like China, 2.3 million deaths, 50.4 million dailies.
Huge numbers.
The highest rates of mortality in dailies are actually seen in places like Central Europe.
Yeah.
And even tiny Monaco shows the highest rates globally.
Monaco? Really?
Yes, extremely high rates. It suggests that even within developed regions, there are differences in health system capacity, access to the most advanced care, or perhaps different profiles of risk factors driving those outcomes.
It's a complex, almost paradoxical picture then. And what's particularly worrying, you mentioned, is the trend in lower STI countries.
That's right. It's a major concern. While these countries often have lower incidence rates, maybe due to less screening or younger populations overall,
Okay.
their mortality rates are actually increasing. Southern Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, showed the most significant upward trend in both mortality and dailies between 1990 and 2021. Lesotho also saw a rapid rise.
So fewer diagnosed cases maybe, but worse outcomes when they are diagnosed.
That seems to be the pattern. The reasons are multifaceted. There can be underlying genetic differences, yes, but also big variations in exposure to risk factors.
Right.
But crucially, there are huge disparities in detection and diagnostic capabilities. Think about access to CT scanners, pathology labs.
Basic infrastructure.
Exactly. And then there's the effectiveness of prevention strategies and just the sheer availability of healthcare resources, trained oncologists, cancer drugs, radiotherapy.
So the high S&I countries have the tech and the resources for early detection and treatment.
Correct. They benefit hugely from things like widespread screening mammograms, colonoscopies, and massive healthcare investments. The study notes, for instance, the huge spending on prostate cancer care in Europe.
And the low SDI countries.
They face enormous challenges. They're dealing with aging populations too, but often without sufficient resources to manage that increasing cancer burden. It leads to higher mortality for cancers that might be more treatable elsewhere. It's a stark reminder of health inequity.
It really highlights how socioeconomic factors shape the cancer landscape, and not always intuitively. It's not just about if you get cancer, but where you get it in terms of your chances.
That's right.
Okay, let's add another layer here. How do age and sex factor into these patterns? The study mentioned men having higher rates after 65.
Yes, that was quite clear. After age 65, incidence rates were significantly higher in males than females. And that gap persisted for mortality rates, which stayed higher for males across all the older age groups studied.
Interesting. And does it break down further within those older age groups?
It does. So for the very highest rates of incidence, mortality, and dailies for females, that peak was in the 95-plus age group.
The very oldest.
Yes. While for males, the rates peak slightly earlier in the 90-94 group.
Okay.
However, if you look at the sheer absolute numbers where the bulk of cases and deaths are happening,
All right, the total volume.
the highest incidence was actually in females aged 55-59 and males aged 65-69. And the highest number of deaths and dailies occurred in both sexes aged 70-74.
Ah, so that's a key distinction. The risk rate is highest for the extremely elderly, but the largest number of people affected falls in that sort of late middle age to early older age bracket.
Exactly. It helps target where the greatest volume of the burden lies, even if the per-person risk is highest later.
Got it. Now, what about specific types of neoplasms? Are there particular cancers showing dramatic trends?
Definitely. The study highlights a really rapid increase in the incidence of skin neoplasms, particularly non-melanoma skin cancer, NMSC.
Okay, that makes sense with sun exposure over lifetimes, maybe.
That's likely a major factor. Also, somewhat surprisingly, neuroblastoma and other peripheral nervous cell tumors showed the highest increase among all neoplasms looked at from 1990 to 2021.
Neuroblastoma, isn't that usually seen in children?
Primarily, yes, But seeing it show the highest rate of increase across this period, including in older groups, is notable and likely warrants more investigation.
Interesting. Any good news on specific types?
Yes, some positive trends too. Stomach cancer and Hodgkin lymphoma, for example, showed really substantial declines in mortality and daily rates.
Hmm.
That's excellent news, likely reflecting better treatments and maybe changes in risk factors like H. pylori for stomach cancer.
Good to hear.
But then, here's where it gets really eye-opening for specific age groups.
Go on.
Liver cancer. In both sexes, it showed the highest increase in incidence, mortality, and daily rates, specifically in the 95-plus age group.
The highest increase in the oldest groups. How high?
For males in that 95-plus group, the increases were, well, enormous. Over 12 times higher for incidence, mortality, and dailies, respectively, compared to baseline trends. A really dramatic surge in the very oldest old.
Wow, over 12 times. That's incredible. What could be driving that? Late onset effects of viral hepatitis, maybe, or?
That's a strong possibility. Chronic liver damage accumulating over a very long lifetime perhaps playing out. And connecting aging more broadly, the study emphasizes that gastrointestinal and respiratory neoplasms are really profoundly affected by aging.
So things like?
Stomach cancer, gallbladder, biliary tract, nasopharyngeal, laryngeal, esophageal cancers, all heavily influenced by age. And other big ones impacted significantly by aging include tracheal, bronchus, and lung cancer, bladder cancer, ovarian cancer, and leukemia. It really paints a picture of how our cells and systems change with age, increasing susceptibility in specific areas.
It really does. Which, naturally, leads to the question, beyond just age and demographics, what are the big drivers? What are the main risk factors we need to focus on? Are we talking the usual suspects, or are new players emerging?
Well, the main player, the established primary risk factor, is still overwhelmingly smoking.
No surprise there, sadly.
No. In 2021, it remained the most significant single risk factor for neoplasms globally. Interestingly, it peaked in high-middle SDI regions.
Okay.
But the good news, as we touched on, is that globally, its impact has decreased by over 10% between 1990 and 2021.
That is a positive trend. We need that to continue, obviously.
Absolutely. Public health efforts are working, albeit slowly.
Okay, so smoking is still number one, though declining. What about the other major contributors? What else is really moving the needle significantly?
Well, there's a cluster of other important factors, each accounting for, a substantial chunk, maybe over 20% of the attributable burden in some analyses. These include high fasting plasma glucose.
Linked to diabetes and metabolic issues?
Right. High body mass index, so obesity, alcohol use, ambient particulate matter pollution, air pollution, essentially.
Still a huge global issue.
Definitely. Occupational exposure to asbestos, though hopefully declining with regulation. Diet high in red meat, and unsafe sex linked primarily to HPV and certain cancers.
And the mechanisms for these are pretty well understood, right?
Generally, yes. Smoking brings carcinogens that damage DNA. High glucose is tied to insulin resistance, inflammation, cell proliferation. Alcohol's breakdown products directly damage DNA. Particulate matter causes oxidative stress, inflammation. Asbestos leads to chronic inflammation and scarring.
These are the known battlegrounds, the factors we've been targeting with public health messages for years.
Correct.
But here's where the study threw up something genuinely surprising, wasn't it?
Right.
A rapidly accelerating risk factor that maybe isn't on everyone's radar.
That's absolutely right. The data revealed something quite striking. The fastest growing risk factor from 1990 to 2021. It wasn't obesity or pollution, though they are hugely important.
What was it?
It was drug use.
Drug use.
Yes. An increase of over 100% globally in its contribution to the neoplasm burden.
100% increase. That's massive.
It is. And in the high SDI regions, it's even more staggering. For deaths and dailies attributable to drug use as a risk factor for neoplasms, the increase was over 200%.
200% high-income countries. What kind of drug use are we talking about here? Illicit drugs? Prescription drugs?
Well, the study category is broad, but it likely encompasses both. It's not just about illicit substances, but potentially the complex long-term effects and interactions of multiple prescription medications, especially common in elderly populations managing chronic conditions. Polypharmacy is a known issue.
Okay, so how might drug use increase cancer risk?
The study suggests a few mechanisms, things like immune suppression. Certain drugs can weaken the immune system's ability to detect and destroy cancer cells.
Makes sense.
Also, hormonal effects from some drugs and metabolic changes that could create an environment more conducive to tumor growth. It's a relatively newer area of focus for cancer risk specifically, and it's clearly expanding rapidly.
And the study mentioned potential solutions.
It touched upon the potential for things like digital adherence interventions using tech to help people manage medications properly and better nutritional monitoring. These could play a key role in mitigating medication-related problems and improving overall well-being, which becomes even more critical as drug use emerges as such a prominent risk factor, particularly in the elderly.
Wow. Okay, so if we try and tie all this together, connect it back to that bigger picture, it really highlights just how complex this all is.
Absolutely.
We're dealing with these long-standing habits like smoking, environmental factors like pollution, metabolic issues like obesity and high glucose, and these emerging, rapidly accelerating challenges like the impact of drug use. It's a truly multifaceted problem.
It really demands a dynamic and tailored approach. So just to summarize the key findings from this really insightful review,
Yeah, let's recap.
we've seen the substantial and very geographically varied burden of neoplasms in the elderly population globally.
Right. Huge numbers, but different patterns depending on where you live.
We noted the sharp rise in skin neoplasm incidence overall,
That was striking.
and the really pronounced impact of aging on gastrointestinal and respiratory cancers, plus that dramatic surge in liver cancer in the very oldest group.
Yeah, the 95-plus group.
And finally, this dual challenge, smoking still being the primary risk factor, even though its influence is slowly declining, alongside this rapidly growing and perhaps less recognized concern around drug use as a significant and accelerating risk factor.
It's a lot to take in, but this kind of deep dive, based on such thorough data, provides really crucial insights, doesn't it, for healthcare professionals planning services, for policymakers setting priorities, and frankly, for you listening, just to understand the current landscape and maybe how it informs your own health awareness and decisions.
Knowledge is definitely power here, both for individual choices and for advocating for better public health strategies.
So maybe a final thought to leave people with.
Yeah.
Something provocative to chew on.
Well, thinking about this complex interplay lifestyle, environment, genetics, maybe medication use, all interacting with advancing age, it really raises the question, how do we move towards truly personalized prevention and early detection?
Beyond the current screening guidelines.
Exactly. How can we tailor strategies to meet the unique challenges of this increasingly older and incredibly diverse global population? What role could things like advanced diagnostics, genomics, liquid biopsies, or even AI play in analyzing all these factors and tailoring approaches to individual risks? Moving beyond one-size-fits-all feels essential.
That's a profound question for the future of medicine and public health, isn't it? How to personalize our approach to these diseases that will define health for so many in the coming decades.
It's the central challenge, I think.
Well, that was a truly fascinating and I think really important deep dive into the global burden of neoplasms in the elderly. We really hope you feel much more informed now and maybe even sparked to look into some of these areas further.
Hopefully so.
And a huge special thank you must go to Dr. Reza Lankrani, an editorial board member of the Genesis Journal of Surgery and Medicine. It was his profound and comprehensive review that provided the solid foundation for our entire discussion today.
Hear, hear. An invaluable resource.
Absolutely. And if you want to access additional details from the review and continue your own deep dive, you can refer to the Surgical Pioneering podcast series application. It's available at the following link: https://surgicalpioneer.codeadx.me.
Well worth checking out for more depth.
Definitely. So until next time, keep digging for those nuggets of knowledge.